Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Mindflex from Project Inspire. And today we have a really, really interesting topic, a hot topic, cremation or burial. That is the question. And as with many of these Mindflex series, we've been hearing from amazing people who have really, in many cases, dedicated their lives to certain topics. And here we are again. We are honored tonight to have with us Rabbi Doron Kornbluth from Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel. He's with us today, as well as Robin Myerson. Robin Myerson lives in Scottsdale, Arizona. Rabbi Doron Kornbluth from Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel. Thank you both for joining us today.
Nice to be here. Hi.
Thank you.
Rabbi Kornbluth, you wrote a book that was published by Mosaic Press. You could hold it up for us so we could actually see it. Cremation or burial. Now, there are many people that are watching this that might be wondering why somebody like you, who's an author and a very talented fellow, would dedicate time and energy into a book that maybe is not so relevant today. Even there are people watching this who might not realize how relevant or not relevant the topic is. What made you get involved in this subject, and what made you write the book that you wrote?
Thank you. It goes back about 10, 11 years. I've been privileged to be a teacher and educator. I travel around before Corona, speaking in different places. And my topics have always been very positive. I wrote a book called Why Be Jewish, and I speak to teenagers and college students about that. I wrote a book called Raising Kids to Love Being Jewish, and I speak to grandparents and parents and all different types of organizations. And I'm on a speaking tour in Florida. This is probably 2009, 2010, I forget exactly. And I open up a Jewish newspaper, and there is an advertisement in the Jewish newspaper from a Jewish funeral home offering, and I quote, Jewish cremations. And I was in shock because I'm a traditional Jewish boy from Montreal, and I didn't know there was such a thing as Jewish cremations. I mean, just a couple generations after the Holocaust. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And so I started looking into the subject, and I was amazed to find that it's not just that one place in Florida. Cremation was already at the time taking America by storm. The rates overall for non-Jews and Jews, the rates were going up dramatically. Fast forward in 2017, for all Americans, it flipped from a majority burial to majority cremation. The majority of American dead today are cremated. It's about 52, 53%, going up every year. Jews are behind that, but not as far behind as we'd like to think. At least 1/3 of the American Jewish dead are being cremated today. It is that high. There is no doubt about it. And I was in shock when I got into the subject, and I started researching. And what I did was something that I like to do. I went into the local Jewish bookstores and I was amazed there was nothing on the subject. So I spent about 3 years researching cremation and burial. I did an amazing amount of research at the time. Got the blueprints of the crematory ovens to find out about their environmental impact and in electricity use. Talked to funeral directors, read everything I could on the subject, and after a few years, resulted in the book Cremation or Burial. And then Hashem was kind enough to bring Robin and I together, and she helped make it possible to put it out there and wrote the foreword. And, we've been partners ever since. And when I started, the book came out in 2012. And when I started at the time, it was interesting that I did a lot of speaking, but cremation was a small number of talks. Now, fast forward 8 years, I spoke last night to a community in Delaware about cremation. I'm speaking tonight to a community in Baltimore about cremation. I have a talk next week. This is extremely relevant and much more so than I ever thought, because this is how I frame it to people. This is perhaps the last decision a person will ever make. and it's a big one, and it's a permanent one. So it's something that is relevant to people, and people do care about. And there is so little good information out there that I kind of took it on as my hobby, to give it a better word.
It would seem to me, Rabbi Kornbluth, that you were just a little bit ahead of your time, meaning just before it became the hot topic to speak about, you already had the information to be able to share with others. Robin, Rabbi Kornbluth mentions that, Hashem put you guys together in terms of teaming up for this cause. You wrote a book, we could see it as well, From This World to the Next. That was published by the Chevra Kadisha, the Burial Association. And Robin, tell us what got you into the subject and why was this so important to you?
Well, the timing couldn't have been perfect because I'm in the Chevra Kadisha, which is the Burial Society, and I had been doing that for many, many years. And I'm a Baal Tshuva, so learning about all the different Jewish practices was very new to me. And I have family members who chose to be cremated. And so it was very, very personal. And no matter what I would research to look for, to find information, whether it was on websites or books or whatever, or just personal pleas to my family, I couldn't change their mind because they weren't compelling enough. And then one day I happened to be mentioning it to somebody, and they said, well, there's this manuscript that Doron is putting together, you have to take a look at it. And I was in the middle of two family members literally deciding what they were going to do. And I said, you got to send me the manuscript immediately. So I took a look at it and I thought this would have answered my aunt's questions. And so it's very personal for me. Unfortunately, that particular aunt chose to be cremated. It was too late to see the book and the information. But since then, for the last 10 years, I've been involved with, I have 2 cases right now I'm dealing with, 2 calls that I had yesterday. On almost a weekly basis, I'm dealing with people who call me from around the country, from around the world, who have family members who have decided to cremate themselves. So, and I have countless miracle stories that come up as a result of this. Where it happens, we do get to bury them, thank God. It's not always successful, but I chronicle these miracle stories because it's out of this world, really, what happens. So it's very
Amazing.
Personal for me.
Amazing. Rabbi Kornbluth, the concept of burial versus, or cremation, is this something that, again, I'm assuming that a lot of the viewers, as myself, it's sort of a non-topic in some of the areas that we grow up in. Maybe you had a distant relative that chose to be cremated. Is this something that's a Jewish custom, a Jewish law? Why is this so important in terms of, from a Judaism standpoint?
It's a great question, and I'll answer it if I can with a true story. In the Kovno ghetto in World War II, there was a rabbi named Rabbi Ephraim Oshry. He actually survived the war and moved to New York. And he told the following story. One day he's in his little room in the ghetto, and a Nazi SS officer barges in, slams the door behind him, blonde hair, blue eyes, uniform. And Rabbi Oshry thinks that it's his last moments on planet Earth. And this Nazi officer starts speaking to him in perfect Yiddish. Rabbi, I'm a Jew. I have fake papers. This is how I'm surviving the war. I'm in a back office. I'm not doing anything bad, God forbid. But I have an important question for you. I'm a very sick man, and I only have a few weeks to live. And I know what they're going to do to my body. They're going to bury me in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over my body, surrounded by Nazis. Rabbi, I could do this for a while to survive the war, but to be there for eternity, I can't. Rabbi, am I allowed to be cremated in order to avoid the fate of being buried with a Nazi cross over my body forever? And Rabbi Oshry responded to him, my dear, dear child, no, you're not. And he quoted verse after verse. It's a clear pasuk, a clear verse in the Torah for those who are interested. This is not the only source. It's one of the main sources that is brought. It's in Devarim Chaf Aleph, towards the end. That's Deuteronomy 21. If a man shall have committed a sin whose judgment is death, he shall be put to death. you shall hang him on the gallows. His body shall not remain for the night on the gallows. Rather, you shall surely bury him on that day. In Hebrew, the phrase that is used is kavor tikbrinu, definitely bury. This is one of the sources in the Torah. By the way, the death penalty in Judaism is extremely rare. The Talmud said that if a court of law would put a person to death once in 70 years, that's too much. Even in the case when it would happen, an evil case, the guy fills all the requirements, still in that case, you bury him. So Rabbi Ushri quoted the verses, Talmudic references, Maimonides, Code of Jewish Law, and it is clear throughout Judaism, this is a huge mitzvah, not just a custom. It is a commandment. It is an obligation. In fact, when a Jewish community is being formed, one of the first things they're supposed to do, you set up a school for the kids, a mikvah, ritual bath, and a chever kedisha, to proper burial. This is a core Jewish value, mitzvah obligation. If I was creating a religion, so to speak, I don't know if I would really care so much about what happens to a dead body. Right. But our religion does, big time.
Right. It's amazing. It sounds like you're very passionate about it. Of course, I'm going to go on to ask you, Robin, but, just want to remind viewers that, Rabbi Kormuth pointed out how relevant this topic has become, and unfortunately how more relevant it is becoming. So just to remind everybody, Cremation or Burial, and From This World to the Next, 2 books that are amazing books that are available on the subject. Robin, what when people come to you, or are sent your way, you mentioned you're dealing with 2 cases right now. So people come your way, the assumption is they don't know most of the information that's already in your book, in either of your books. They're coming to you with this question. How do you describe to people in a nutshell, or, to use the Torah terminology of standing on one foot, right? The concept of the afterlife and the importance of burial. And what do you find people most accept regarding the topic?
So every conversation has to be very personal, actually. So the first thing I ask them when a case comes to me is, why? Why is your family member choosing to be cremated? Because usually they don't have a concept of the afterlife. They don't even believe in it. They never heard of it. They thought it was a Christian topic. They have pictures in their mind from Hollywood or whatever, or storybooks about that it's not a Jewish concept. So I don't even bring up the afterlife right away. The first thing I ask is, why are you choosing this for your family member? Because if they say it's because, I think it's, quick, then I explain to them that it's not quick. It can take 3 hours. And then they say, I think it's easy to do. And I say, well, it's not easy on the body. And I explain in graphic detail what actually happens in a cremation. Then somebody will say to me, well, it was in the will, so I think I have to follow it from a legal perspective. And I'll say to them, actually, you don't have to follow the will. It's actually a sin to follow the will and cremate your grandmother. So it depends what they say to me. Then I respond to them and how we can get over this and choose a burial. There's lots of different reasons people choose, and it has to be very personal.
Right.
You don't want to get into an argument with Robin. You're not going to do very well.
That's the other thing. They'd rather bury them than have to continue the argument. That's for sure. But Rabbi Kormuth, is there some way of explaining to people, suppose they're open and they're not, stuck on the concept of absolutely having to cremate? Can you explain to people the concept of what happens to the body in the afterlife in a way that touches people spiritually, that will help them, go ahead with the burial?
Sure. Well, first of all, I agree with Robin that the afterlife is not the first place to start with most people, in my experience. Interestingly, it's, the classic reason given in our sources for burial rather than cremation is Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. It is the last thing that I usually talk about. People simply aren't there normally, and we have to start at the more basic practical things, as Robin mentioned. That being said, to focus on soul talk, as they call it, is important. And everybody relates to that in some way, and some people more than others. So I give the following idea that gets people thinking a little bit along these lines. So I always ask for I used to give talks in person. Now the last 7-8 months, it's all on Zoom. And one of the one of the challenges is Zoom is great because I can stay here and speak all over the world, and we can talk and we can meet. And we're in 3 different locations right now, the 3 of us. It's amazing. And the challenge obviously is to make it interactive. So what I do is I always ask people, okay, why don't you give me a show of hands? How many people have ever visited a Jewish monastery or a Jewish convent? And of course, nobody raises their hands. Why? Because there aren't any. So I ask people, why not? What, you think that 2.4 billion Christians are stupid, or 1 billion Hindus are stupid? They're not stupid people. It's a philosophy. Convents, there's a philosophy that like this, that some religions, some worldviews, some people have an idea that spirituality is up there and physicality is down here. And if I want to reach up, I want to get close to God, I want to be more spiritual, what do I have to do? Avoid the physical. Sleep on the floor. Don't eat good food. Don't have an intimate life. Be celibate. And this is the core. Every religion is different. They have their own things, but that's the core of an idea that appears in a lot of different places in world history. We, of course, by the way, if you ask a Catholic, who's the holiest person on the planet, they'll probably say the Pope. Celibate, right? Doesn't have party and good food and things like that, right? An Eastern guru is, is on the mountaintop by himself, doesn't get married, doesn't have children. So Judaism, of course, is the exact opposite. Spirituality and physicality are supposed to go together. That's the highest level of spirituality, when you bring God into the world. In Kabbalistic terminology, it's called the dira b'tachtonim. It's called God is having a place amongst us, amongst the reality, in the physical world. So the idea is that our lives are meant to be spiritual, and our souls are in our body, and our body becomes holy. It's an incredible idea. Everybody knows. What do you do with a Torah scroll that is damaged beyond repair? Right? If you can fix a Torah scroll, the scribe, the sofer, will fix it. Okay, happens all the time. But what if you can't fix it? An old one from the Holocaust, or God forbid there's a fire, or the Hurricane Katrina, and a bunch of Sefer Torahs, a bunch of Torah scrolls are destroyed. So what do you do with it? You bury it. Why? Because it's the holiest object we have. Well, no matter who you are, man, woman, old, young, learned, not learned, whoever you are holier. Your body, your soul, your body, you are holier than Torah scroll. And your soul and your body are holy and have to be respected and has a place in the world to come. So the soul, connecting to the soul and connecting to the afterlife, once you start understanding a little bit about it, it opens up the whole future. Because once we realize we have a soul, we know that it's not just here, it's forever.
Amazing. And Robin, how does this balance out with the convenience aspect of I could sort of keep my dear relative on the shelf nearby, etc. How does this concept look? Many people have, recently connected to spirituality, or don't really get the concepts, or what Rabbi Korman was saying is really is a beautiful concept. But I'm hearing it now for the first time when I'm coming to either cremate or bury my mom, dad, close relative. How do you get people to sort of push them over the edge of that, to understand that?
So first of all, what I also ask people is they might already have cremated another loved one before they have come to me. So I actually tell them, the past, don't work, it happened. We have to move on. Don't feel horrible because you just didn't know. Most of the people I talk to, they just did not know. They didn't have the education. So I say, it's okay. We're going to now move on to the next person, and we're going to explain this about how you can help. So what I do is I also say that this is the last kindness that you can do. This is a kindness for the soul. The body that you had all these years, you did mitzvahs. You whether or not you were religious or not, you got married, you had children, you hugged your loved ones, whatever. So your body helped you do all these different things. So, you have to treat the body with respect, but you also have to know that your soul is going to be there forever, for eternity. And so I explained to them that even if you're not sure, you think, well, maybe burial is right, or maybe cremation is right, you're not sure. I tell them that burial is the safer choice. And I also tell them that those ashes are not your mom. There's no DNA in those ashes. They can just be they can just be thrown in the garbage. And most of those ashes are not even picked up. They're just like left at the mortuary. And people think, oh, it's poetic. I can sprinkle them in the ocean, or I could put them in the redwood forest. But that's like damaging to the sea and damaging to the forest. Why would you want to do that? I say instead of having those ashes, which nobody picks up hardly, why don't you take a lock of hair, or favorite sweater, a picture, make a photo album, whatever you can to remember your loved one. And of course, we want to remember our loved one, but the ashes are not mom. It's not, there's no DNA. In fact, a Kohen who is, not allowed to be around a dead body can be around ashes. It's that simple. There's nothing in those ashes.
Right. And so this really explains to people that, like, you think that you're holding on to something close. In essence, really, you're not in the same way as you could by honoring the body and the spirituality, the holiness of the physical body. Rabbi Kornbluth, Robin touched on this, earlier within arguments that people bring up in terms of cremating versus burial, is that well, it's in the will, so I need to do it. Her answer was, actually, it's a sin. But do you run into issues legally when you have these conversations with people? Where does that stand with regard to, obviously, speak about the concept of in Judaism of fulfilling a dying man's or dying woman's will versus doing what's proper, and where the legal ramifications can come in.
Right. So there's a story. I've heard this about couple different people, but I think it's about Rothschild, the first great Rothschild. He had all the 5 kids and went all over the place. That Rothschild, he dies, and in his will, his testimony, whatever, he commands that he be buried in his socks, and his children are taken aback. And they go to the burial society, the Chevra Kadisha. By the way, the only organization in Jewish history that is known as Chevra Kadisha, Holy Society, not Burial Society, Holy Society. It's amazing. So the rabbis in the Chevra Kadisha say, no such thing. You can be buried in your socks. And they go to the great rabbis and this and that. Nobody will. And so he's buried without his socks. And the week after, when they're after Shiva, when they're sitting down with the lawyers and going through the will, there's a letter to the kids saying, I'm sure by now you've realized that I asked for the socks, strange request, and you couldn't fulfill it. And I was buried without my socks. Of course, the Chevra Kadisha wouldn't allow it. So the lesson is that, you're now inheriting a bunch of money. Don't think money is going to go with you, right? It's a beautiful lesson. I can't even take my socks to the next world. Never mind the money, right? But the background of the story is you try and fulfill divrei hames mekaymin, right? That you try and fulfill the desires of the dead person. There are exceptions to that. Again, we're the ones who taught the world that, but there are exceptions to that. And the way to think of it, I think, one way to think of it is like this. Just ask a question. When am I closer to knowledge of God? Now, in my physical body, or after 120 years when I'm upstairs? I hope I'll be upstairs. So most people answer, there, right? Because here, we have a job to do here. We're on the planet for a reason, to change ourselves, to change the world, to change but there's so many distractions, and I have so many things going on in my head, and I have notifications and text messages and emails, and it's so many things blocking me from God. But when you're in the spiritual world, you're much more connected, much more clarity, much more knowledge of God. Meaning that right now, your relative who just passed in this world requested something. They requested something based on a lack of information. Now they understand things much better. Why did they request cremation? They requested cremation because It was cheaper. They didn't want you to spend the money. They didn't want to be a burden. They thought it was better for the environment. It's not. But it's not real. And if they knew how important it was to you, and if they knew the truth, and right now they do know, they'd want burial. So those who are given the task of choosing the final decisions are allowed to override the technical request of the deceased, if that's the deeper reason, that's the deeper desire of what they would want. If they understood how I feel, how their grandkids would feel, how the descendants would feel, if they understood what the real reasons are, they would have requested something different. So that, I believe,
that's right. And Robin, that's obviously in Jewish law. Is that the same with regard to legalities? Are people worried that a sibling will sue them over this?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that question. So people will come to me and say, it's in the will. I don't want to be arrested. I don't want to be sued. I tell them, don't worry. You're not going to be arrested if you don't follow the will as regards to burial or cremation. And don't worry about it. But there's actually something else I want to mention about this too. I say the reason.
Wait, just that point. Why is that? Is that actually the law out there? I mean, I'm sure people think that, like, what do you mean? It's a legal document. I got to do exactly how it says. Like, is that really the case, or is just the assumption is that the legal system is just not going to take up something like this?
I don't know of a case where someone's been sued. Maybe there was one, but it's very, very, very rare that I've heard of. And also, I tell people that was what was their will at the time. But if they wrote in their will, can you please, take my body and drag it down the street on the back of a truck? Would you follow their will to do that? You couldn't.
Or bury me with my socks.
Right, exactly. I want to actually share a spooky story. Is it okay as it relates to the will?
Sure.
Okay,
Absolutely.
So it's a real story. I heard it firsthand. So there was a man who had in his will that he wanted to be cremated, but then when it came time, when he passed, the son went to a rabbi and said, I really don't want to do this. What should I do? And the rabbi said, you don't have to follow the will. But the sister was very adamant and wanted to follow the will. So the rabbi decided that the cremation had not happened yet, and they wanted to do a memorial service, okay? So they got together in the deceased home, and they had about 25 people in the living room, and they started the service, the memorial service, because there had been no cremation or no funeral at this point. The person who had passed away was actually in the morgue, right? So they're sitting in the living room, and they're about to say some prayers, and when the rabbi starts, he's speaking in English, everything's fine. But then when he starts saying some Tehillim, the lights started to flicker in the living room. And the audience, or not the audience, the participants got a little bit nervous. And then he started speaking in English and everything stopped. But then we started Hebrew again, the lights were flickering. And then there was a phone call. The son got up to look at the phone, and the caller ID was his father. There was nobody on the other line. The guy practically faints. The rabbi stops the service and he says, the service is over right now. He calls the brother and the sister together, and they go into a separate room in the house, and he says, bring me the will. They look at the will. He puts it in his pocket and he says, you know what this is about, right? You know your father's trying to contact us, right? You know that his will right now is to be buried, right? So the brother and the sister are like, yeah, you're right. People were very freaked out, if you can imagine. So they decided to do
and
a
you
burial.
Sure wasn't you calling on the other end of the line, Robin, just
That's
to do
right.
it, right?
They decided to do a burial. So you know what? This is a spooky story, but it's very, very real.
Amazing. Rabbi Kornbluth, the concept, I'm actually a Kohen. So for me, I don't go to cemeteries often. I'm not, even though people will come to Israel and call me left and right to find out how far is this one buried from that one, in order, as if there's a ways of the cemeteries and stuff. I become that address. But you learn about concepts such as, when you walk in a cemetery, your tzitzis, you're supposed to tuck them inside and make sure that they're not out, because there's some type of jealousy of the dead people. How do you explain to people the concept of the will to still do commandments when a person's not alive anymore, but they're not able to.
So it's a great question. I would take a step back, and that's imagine the following scenario. Okay, husband and wife have been lovingly married for 50 years, and God forbid the husband dies, and the woman sits shiva. After sitting shiva, she gets up, takes off her black dress, puts on a red party dress, goes out to the bars, and starts clubbing, looking for a guy that very night. Sound normal to you? Of course not, right? When you have a partner, you don't move on that quickly. It just doesn't work that way. This is your partner. You can't just switch gears. The soul and the body are partners. The body is not evil. We talked about it a little before. Physicality is not bad. I couldn't give charity, give tzedakah without my body. I couldn't have children. I couldn't do anything. That's why. So the soul is very connected to its body. It is aware of what is happening to its body. So yes, in the cemetery, people think that, I'm not going to know what's going on, after I die. What do I care? Like, throw my body out. The Vikings put the body on a raft and lit it a fire down the river. The Tibetans put it on a tower and let the vultures eat it. I mean, there's a million things that people have done with bodies, right? In certain parts of Latin America, they put it under the floorboards of the kitchen. I mean, there's all different types of things you can do with dead bodies. And people think, I'll be dead, I won't know. And actually, you will. You will be aware. And that's why you mentioned, this concept of loeg l'rash, of making fun of a poor person, of a poor missus, someone who's you're out there, and obviously you don't go into a cemetery, and because you're in a cemetery, you speak slander. I mean, you keep Jewish law, but you don't have to flaunt it. So you don't have to have those sits of the strings outside of flaunting it, because we have an advantage over them. They have an advantage over us, but we have an advantage over them, right?
Which means that intrinsic in Jewish law is already teaching us that your opportunity is now, even though you might be, closer to the truth and the source then, but your opportunities are now. Is that something that comes up in conversation to the people that are alive, to the relatives of, to sort of take advantage of the time, because it's not all about the afterlife, it's about this life as well. Robin, you have that?
Yeah, definitely. What I tell people is that the soul knows exactly what's going on. When the soul departs the body, when it leaves, it's hovering over the body. It's kind of discombobulated, and it knows what's happening. Even in the burial society, in the Hever Kadisha, when we're preparing the body to be buried, the soul is there, and the soul is at the Shiva house, and in multiple Shiva houses. So the soul is very aware of what's going on. And that's why our Jewish customs are so beautiful and so respectful and so modest. So when we take care of a body after the person has passed away, we don't talk. We just say Tehillim. We're very modest, very careful, very respectful, and very calm. And the soul also, it knows what's going on down here for eternity. And so that's why our Jewish customs of saying Kaddish gives merit to the soul, and our Jewish custom of saying Yisker, certain prayers to help the neshama move higher, to help the soul go higher and higher in the next world. Those Jewish customs that we have while we're here on this earth help the soul in the next realm. And the soul also goes to a place called Gehenna, which a lot of people think, well, that's Christian, it's like with pitchforks and, whatever. But it's a place that God designed to clean the soul from the mistakes that it made in this world. So there's a lot of beautiful traditions that we have in our Jewish culture. And I do explain it if there's an opportunity, definitely, with people, because I tell them that, the reason you're calling me right now is because your mom or your dad or your grandmother or whatever is in the knowing place right now, and they want to be buried.
Amazing. I want to put this out to you, because I would imagine that, that people that are coming with these type of dilemmas, whether it's in the will, they just heard the concept, someone said you got to call Robin Meyerson or you got to call Daron Kornbluth before you decide on anything. Do you find, often, or at least at times, that people because the level of ignorance is so high with with Judaism overall, do people take the opportunity from the conversation about burial and cremation and start to say, hey, I'm 60 years old, mom died at 90. Why didn't I know any of this for the last 60 years? Do you find that the conversation leads to whether it's observance of other commandments or exploring Judaism further?
Absolutely. It's a gorgeous situation when people, they realize their own eternity. They realize that the life that they have on this earth is finite. So they start to question their life and what their purpose is. And, they start to take on practices. I have countless stories of people that have helped choose burial where they start to take on mitzvahs, start to keep kosher, add a mezuzah to their house, they or go all the way, there's countless stories like that because they realize this is for real. I'm a soul in a body and I have mitzvahs that I can do, and they question their life. So they take time to learn.
Do you find that when people, Rabbi Korman, do you find that when people come with these questions, that many times it opens up other doors?
Absolutely. It depends a little bit why they're coming and what type of personality and interest they have, if they're kind of more spiritual people, intellectual people, or just an environmental question or just a money question. Obviously, it depends. But I think Robin's 100% right. I once heard a quote from Woody Allen, the American comedian, and he said that I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying. So people do have this inner, like, we want to do something with our lives. We want to be here. We want to have a legacy. We want to it's part of the human personality. It's part of our soul. And once people are connected with spirituality, I think that comes out and they want to express it and they want to have an impact and they want to connect to it more. So yeah, definitely.
I have one more. Go ahead, Rob.
I wanted to add something to what Doron said about comedians. Jerry Seinfeld, he's, iconic comedian. He has a little video where he says, I want to be buried, So if Jerry Seinfeld wants to be buried, we should all, kind of emulate what Jerry Seinfeld wants.
Right. And right. I have one more question, for this part one, and you guys have so far been amazing. This is enlightening for me, and I admit, I haven't come across the topic that often, but it's amazing to me how relevant it is, how often the question comes up. But, we as an organization in Project Inspire and in our different communities, we're constantly promoting the concept of sharing Judaism with others, sharing the beauty of Judaism, etc. And many people might be a little reluctant to bring up the subject, A, because they know very little about it in terms of what to tell the next person about it, and B, because people feel that it's very, very sensitive. It's very sensitive. What would you recommend, sort of step one for dummies, if you're approaching the subject or if the subject comes up? What's the first concept you want to at least start the conversation with, Rabbi Kornbluth?
So I always find that it's best to not personalize it, meaning not like right away ask, hi, my name is Doron, like, what are you planning to do with your grandmother? Or, it's not a personal thing. I actually find that sometimes what Robin is sharing, sometimes stories of what other people have gone through, we can relate to it in a different way. That's a good way to broach the subject. For me, it's kind of easy because I wrote a book on the subject, so I usually use that as a opening line, as a calling card. But my focus
we know that those people don't want to bump into either of you two. That we know.
So I will tell you, I focus a lot more on prevention. Robin's really the expert on the one-on-one conversations. I do it sometimes if there's somebody here in Israel or something, but Robin's much more in the chat.
Meaning to say you're more educating people to know about the subject as opposed to taking on clients, as opposed to Robin likes to go for the one-on-one.
Look, I think we both do a little of both, and there's an overlap.
Yeah.
But I think that I'm sort of speaking on to more crowds I think, I don't know where Robin, you tell me what's going, but I think,
Right.
and Robin has a special talent for one-on-one conversations and really speaking through the issues. So I'd love to hear what you have to say, Robin, on the subject. I will add one thing though.
Yeah.
I think that what's really important is not to be morbid and not to talk Jewish guilt, and forgive me, not to talk religion too much. It can't be that it's coming from the outside being forced on me. It's got to be that it makes sense to me and I want to do this. I always tell people that when I was growing up in Montreal, traditional Jewish city, there were some things that Jews just didn't do, more religious, less religious, more observant, less observant. Like, Jews don't eat ham. Jews don't pitch World Series baseball on Yom Kippur, and Jews don't cremate, right? There's just certain things, right? And that's changed.
If you're from Montreal, the Jews never pitch in a World Series,
Ooh, well done. Yeah, touche. But anyways, Robin might have some interesting tidbits there.
Right. So yeah. Robin, I just want to paint for the viewer. You're literally like classic case. You're in an airport, and I'll share a story with you to close out this part because I know it's getting later. But you're standing in an airport, and this goes for anyone who's watching this because it could happen. You're standing in an airport. There's a lovely woman standing next to you, and says, "Oh, where are you flying to today?" "I'm flying to Colorado. We're going to cremate my mom." "Oh, really?" "Yes. First, we're having a service in the temple." However, the conversation comes up, and you're saying this like, "Oh my gosh, I just watched this session on Project Inspire about cremation and burial. Like, what can I possibly leave this person for food for thought? In terms of the subject itself."
Okay, so that's a hard one because it's already in the works. It's already in the plan.
Meaning to say, whatever the picture might be, if it's not for this relative, initial concept of the subject.
So, because there are a lot of people, unfortunately, because of the world we're in right now with COVID and Corona, unfortunately, someone's dying every day. So having the conversation is not so hard to start today. So we say, what are your plans? What are your plans? There's a lot of famous people who are dying. Unfortunately, a lot of people. So you can say, what are your plans? And then I could say, I have my plots. Do you? There's actually a Jewish sort of thing that if you have your plots in advance, you're going to live longer. So it's in your benefit to, buy your plots in advance. So the conversation starter really, it depends on the person, but I do use a little bit of humor. I bring up Seinfeld. I bring up the news. If some celebrity has passed away, even before Corona, I brought up celebrities. I try to use humor. I talk about, if we're talking about a Jewish subject, like if they approach me because they see that I look Jewish, then I bring up the Torah and I talk about Judaism. I say, gosh, there's a lot of death in the Torah, isn't there? There's a lot of people, killing each other and talking about burial. And because Abraham, he spent all this money buying this plot. Gosh, do you have your plot? So, and I also mentioned that we have a place to visit. We have all these cemeteries, which are called a Beis Chaim in Hebrew, which is the land of the living. Did you know that? That's so cool. A cemetery is called the land of the living. So do you have your plots? What are your plans? And I always end with one thing. Put it in writing. There's a burial form on my website. You can get one from your lawyer. You can just download it. It's the easiest thing. You can even get a little MS card and stick it in your wallet. And it just says, these are my final wishes. And it's so easy. I try to leave everybody with an action item. Write it down. Stick it on your fridge. Give it to your mother, your rabbi, your friend, your neighbor, whoever. Write it down that you want to be buried because it's that important. It's so important.
Amazing. I actually have a friend who was on an airplane. And he was sitting next to this young woman on a plane. She was flying from Detroit to New York, and she was catching a flight to London to go. They were cremating her mom. Long story short, he finds out that her mom wants to cremate the grandma. He finds out that they're Jewish. And to make a long story short, by the time, and this is not a guy who's a rabbi who's, accustomed to speaking about the subject at all. By the time she reached London, he had helped arrange a Jewish burial for her in London. So it's not something it's something that comes up more often maybe than we think. But I just want people to be as armed as possible with regard to the answers. We have a lot more to discuss. Thank you so much for part one of this, and look forward to part two.